Hi, my name is Eric Kinsey. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and you're listening to Rulers and Riders, the podcast where we talk to creative people about what they do and what they ride. My guest this week on the show is Deke Dickerson. Deke is a California-based musician who works primarily in rockabilly, but also dabbles in surf, rhythm and blues, and country. He's been in a lot of bands over the years, and that's how we met about 20 years ago. Back when I was a fairly active musician. We've stayed friends ever since, and he's just always one of those people I enjoy seeing. He lives in California, so I don't get to see him as much as I'd like, but it's always a treat. He's a warm, sincere, good dude, and really just a great artist. In addition to being a musician, Deke is a writer, a historian, a collector of rare and unusual and significant instruments. He's also a moto enthusiast. He's got a Moto Guzzi as well as a 60 Cadillac. And we get into some of that, and we talk about how he came by that stuff, how he grew up, and sort of just his passion for all things Americana and American history. Really great chat, really a pleasure to sit down with him. And in addition to being a friend and taking the time out for me to do an interview, Deke graciously allows me to use the intro music from his band Ventures Mania. So, real good friend of the show, real good personal friend too. Hope you like the chat. Let's talk to Deke.
Usual. I'm feeling low, but a little more so than usual. I wanna play that jukebox and hear that song that tells me how I feel since baby's gone. Jukebox Charlie, that's my name.
Well, it all kind of worked out because it's like we're playing with J.M. Van Eaton, so we got to do some Jerry Lee Lewis songs.
Yeah, man.
Mm-hmm. And originally I tried to get Pig Robbins. You know who he is?
Yeah.
I got his phone number
Session
from Chris Scruggs from Marty Stewart's band.
Uh-huh.
And Pig's like blind, and he's 85. And he's like, I don't like doing live shows. I don't like leaving the house. My wife's sick. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, then Micah kind of came out of the woodwork, so it all worked out.
Yeah, I was watching Saturday Night Live, I was like, holy shit, that's my buddy.
That's right, yeah.
You know? I was like, damn.
He's on this
Making
thing?
it. Yeah.
Well, he does like these touring gigs with people, you know. He's not like part of the band or anything, but he's been on, Saturday Night Live and Letterman and a bunch of those kind of things.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that's rad, man. Yeah, good for him. Well, the recording started, so you just
Does that thing work?
yeah, works great.
All right.
It's just weird.
I'm always nervous with that kind of deal.
I know. I try to not be too obtrusive.
No, I just mean when it's a digital thing on a phone or a laptop, I'm always worried it's not going to save it. You're going to do this whole hour-long interview and then, didn't save.
What I haven't had any trouble with this program, but what it'll do is so when I go to mix it, I'll usually do some music, some bumper music to go into it, and sometimes it will insert the bumper music in the middle of the interview, just for no apparent reason. So I have to go in and edit it out. But
yeah,
otherwise, it's just called Ferrite. I've had pretty good luck with it. So yeah, man. So you and I met. I think I'd seen you in. I knew you from Untamed Youth.
Yeah,
and was a fan, and then Dave and Deke combo record came out, and that was probably what year was that? 95? 96?
Well, our first album came out in I think 1993 or 94, okay. And then the second one came out in 95, and we did a bunch of touring in 96 before we broke up. We actually broke up at the tail end of 96.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember, did I meet you then?
I never met you. When I had that 45. I think it was like your first solo 45.
Yeah.
TJ Tuck and Roll.
Yeah.
And that was like in that like kind of. I was kind of like transitioning out of like garage music into more like roots music, and I got that 45 at a record store, and I was like, "Is this guy old? Is this a repro? Like, what is it? He looks like he's right out of the 50s." And I was just like super impressed.
Well, it's funny because, we always try to take our pictures so it looks, authentically old.
Uh-huh.
And there's been at least 2 or 3 times where somebody's come in, they're like, all freaked out, I thought you were going to be 75 years old.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then you try to explain to them, no, we try to take our pictures so they look old, and then they look at you like you're crazy.
Right. Yeah, I think some people like don't get like the whole like homage tradition kind of aspect of it.
Well, it seems like they certainly do more so now than they did back then,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially, with all these young Pokey Lafarge kids trying to pretend like it's the Great Depression, it's like, now it seems like it's really in vogue,
Yeah, it's funny. I think the first time I saw you play in Denver at that, I think it was just a one-off Rockabilly Festival,
Mm-hmm.
but that one was really good. That one, I can't remember besides you guys who was there, maybe like High Noon or somebody else.
Yeah.
But,
Sounds about right.
yeah, but it was really good, and then I met you probably 2 years later.
Yeah, well, I remember you had the Tip Top Daddies, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then the first time we toured through Indianapolis, I think we stayed at your house.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to Brent last night. I was like, hey, man, it's been a long time. And it's like, I know you're on the road and you meet like thousands of people. I don't think you remembered who I was.
He's got a pretty good memory, but, then again, we all look a lot different than we did 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I feel like I need to like have one of those like Elvis Pompadour wigs.
Yeah.
And then, like, some sort of like way to like make my facial hair.
Well, I was just going to say it's mainly the beard because, you were such a clean-cut, smooth dude back then.
Yeah.
Now you're Grizzly Adams.
It's pretty much, man. Pretty much. We all are. All in our own way. So, when you grew up, and you grew up in Columbia?
Well, I was born in St. Louis.
Okay.
Lived there until I was 8, and I lived 5 years in Virginia. My folks are actually from Virginia.
Right.
And then moved back to Columbia, Missouri when I was 13. And Columbia is really where I came of age, I lived there all through my high school years and my year and a half of college and, all through my early touring years. And that's where my parents, stayed, and so I consider it my hometown.
Yeah. And your dad was always like pretty like supportive of your like musical endeavors and curiosity.
Yeah, both my parents were.
Uh-huh.
My mom was a college professor over at the university, so she was always like, well, you have to have something to fall back on, or where you can,
Practical.
Everything she told me was absolutely correct, but when you're 20 years old, you don't care about any of that,
Yeah.
But my dad worked for the Army as a pencil pusher.
Oh, yeah.
He has a degree in aeronautics
Right.
and all that, and he's always been into airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was working some job in St. Louis where it was like, there was 15 people. You'd have to ask him, but if I recall the story correctly, there was 15 people who had full-time jobs just working on one valve that was inside a, some jet fighter, and they would just do paperwork all day, like, yes, this valve is working, let's make 12,000 more of them, and, so he got kind of fed up of that, and he quit his day job, and he started restoring antique airplanes for a
Right.
living. And so then all of a sudden it was like Dad was at home being Mr. Mom, and, making these 1920s and 30s biplanes in his shed, and that was a pretty crazy childhood.
Yeah.
We would go around to what they would call these fly-ins, which is funny because it's like there's parallels in all these worlds, like between the the airplane world and the rockabilly world. It's like the vintage airplane fly-ins were exactly like Viva Las Vegas or whatever. It was just for like dudes who were into old airplanes. So I kind of grew up around all of that. And,
Yeah.
you know, my dad was a hoarder of just crazy old airplane parts. And I just grew up with, you know, propellers everywhere and crap everywhere. And so when I got into music, it's funny because I just wound up being exactly like him, you know, just with a different thing.
Yeah. Didn't he? I can't remember if like somebody had told me or you told me or I read it somewhere. Didn't he live in like a missile silo for a little bit? Or?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a different story.
That's a completely different part of like kookery that he did.
Yeah. No, that's not my dad.
Yeah. Good. Well, he. So I remember when I was like a young rockabilly kid. There are these things called magazines for the listeners.
On paper.
And then there were like the subgenre of magazines called fanzines. And one of the best
on
ones...
Xerox paper.
Yeah. And just like typed out in like construction paper covers. And there was Kicks magazine. And I remember somebody gave me like 2 old Kicks magazines. And there was like a column of you. And I think you were in high school.
Yeah, the first thing I wrote for Kicks magazine, I think I was 14.
Yeah, great.
And that was such a great discovery, you know, because in Columbia I was into all this old 50s and 60s rock and roll stuff, and nobody else was. And when you found Kicks magazine, it was like, wow, there's all these other people out there who are into the same stuff that I am. And then it was all in this, you know, really tiny, you know, 6 or 8 point font that you just barely read. And it was so much information, and you're just learning tons and tons of stuff, you know. And Billy Miller was such a great writer. He had such a flair to, like, get you excited about stuff, really, you know.
Yeah.
It's like he could be writing about an album of Elvis outtakes where there's 23 takes of one song, and he could get you excited about that, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So, for me, that was a great discovery. Like,
yeah, he was awesome. I remember, I just remember, like, reading... in Kicks, and like there was like I think it was like the first time I found out about Hazel Adkins, and just these like funny like transcribed interviews of him, and like being like so wasted, like trying to walk through a door with a guitar, and he like kept hitting like the door jam, and yeah, just like all kinds of funny stuff. And that I think like that magazine is like a really good like time capsule of that kind of like aesthetic of like the 80s and 90s and what would kind of become like retro rock and roll or whatever. But like I listened to like early punk, like lots of teenage garage stuff, like English kind of mod stuff, and like all those like compilations like Back from the Grave and Pebbles and stuff. But also like rockabilly, and, you know, some of the, like, English, you know, kind of neo-rockabilly stuff. And they were just, like, really influential in kind of, like, forming my musical aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know? And...
well, and, you know, you have to explain to the young kids out there that back in those days, especially if you're living in some place like Indianapolis or Columbia, Missouri, it was very much centered around what you could get. It wasn't like today where you can just go on YouTube and everything's there. It was like, you know, I remember my local record store had a rockabilly section, and there would always be like 1 to 4 albums in there. That was it, you know. So if you were into rockabilly, you had to wait until the next album got dropped in there. It was like, oh wow, the Johnny Burnett and the Rock and Roll Trio. I've never heard of this. You know, nowadays it's like the kids have access to anything, and you know, you could possibly think of for free or for close to free. And you know, back then, your musical tapes were very much shaped by what you could actually get your hands on.
Yeah, me for sure, man. I used to get stuff from the library and tape it, or
right.
Probably stole a couple things from the library accidentally or whatever.
Well, and, you know, the cassette tapes, you know, I had a couple of buddies that were located around the country, and if we'd find cool records at garage sales, we'd make cassette tapes of them and send them to each other, and, you know, I learned a ton of stuff from the music that I got off all those tapes.
Yeah, and that was awesome. Just like when somebody would, like, send you a tape, and you would just get some, like, mind-blowing songs you'd never heard of, and it like just like stuck in your brain.
Yep.
Yeah. I was really impressed by how you have, you know, you kind of had like started with Well, was the Untamed Youth your like first big band, or had you had smaller bands before that? Or
You know, I had rockabilly bands first because
Okay.
it was the era of the Stray Cats,
Right.
And then I discovered Kicks magazine,
right?
and you know, there could be a great documentary about how hard it is to form a rockabilly band out in the hinterlands, because you know, back then it was like an upright bass. If we could just find somebody who could play an upright bass,
Yeah.
that would be incredible, you know. And my first rockabilly band, I had a buddy who's a great guy, and he loved rockabilly, but he was a bluegrass upright bass player.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, he could pluck it, but he couldn't slap it.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, that's as good as it's ever going to get, you know. And this other buddy of mine was just a fan. He was like, well, you're the drummer. So, you know, he bought a drum set and, like, taught himself kind of how to play, and
Mm-hmm.
wasn't very good. And, you know, none of us were very good. But had a 2 or 3 rockabilly bands, and then I just realized, like, man, it is so hard to make this music fly. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's so difficult not only to find the instruments, but just to find people who can actually play them like they're supposed to be played.
Yeah.
And at that same time, I was also getting into all those Back from the Grave 60s garage compilations, and there was a bunch of bands doing that at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Untamed Youth was sort of founded around all that, because the guys that I went to high school with, they could play like that, because all that music was made by, 16-year-old teenage boys back in the 60s, you know. And when the Untamed Youth first went to New York, we were covering all the obvious 60s garage band songs and doing one surf instrumental. And Billy Miller saw us and said, there's just all these other bands with Prince Valiant haircuts and, paisley shirts. They're all doing those songs. The Fuzz Tones, whatever, Chesterfield Kings, like those. That's all been done. Why don't you guys you guys are like wholesome young lads from Missouri. Why don't you guys do more like surf music? And so that's when we started, doing more of a Trashmen, Astronauts, Ronnie and the Daytonas, kind of a Midwest surf kind of a thing, which was received as oddly as you would think it was, like touring around playing with punk bands. Hey, we're the surf band from Missouri, woo!
Yeah.
But it was great, while it happened.
Yeah. And you guys, I think there's like something on your old website about your hearse.
Well, we had a '68 Oldsmobile hearse, and it was awesome. But it's not very practical to tour in.
No.
So we had a lot of hilarious stories about that.
Yeah, pretty good ones.
The worst part, I know you're sort of into cars and motorcycles and all that. The last tour we ever did, somehow or another, I got it in my head I was going to change the plugs and points.
Oh, okay.
And on the distributor cap, you're not supposed to be able to latch it any other way than the way that it's supposed to be done.
Right.
Somehow or another, I got it turned 180 degrees.
Oh no.
And it was misfiring, and it blew this giant hole in the manifold, and it was just a complete disaster. And so that was it for the hearse.
Ah, man. Yeah. When did you when did you move to LA, and kind of like what led up to that?
Well, the Untamed Youth was myself and this guy Mace on bass and this guy Sammy on organ. And then we just could not find a drummer, We had a couple of different guys, and no one wanted to quit their jobs and tour, and no one wanted to do it for reals. And so we went out to California on tour. We went out to New York on tour. And I thought, well, we got to move one of these two places.
Right.
And let's see, everybody that we know in New York works 3 day jobs and lives in like a 400 square foot apartment.
Yeah.
And everybody we know in California doesn't seem to have a job. And they live in like these really nice places. And then, like, literally that was how I made the choice, That just seems like a much better way of life, And of course, decades later, having, clawed my way into, a life in California, it's like, yeah, well, most of those people I met were trust fund kids.
Yeah.
But I still love Los Angeles. I love California, Everybody bags on it. It's like, well, sorry, dude, I still like it.
Yeah.
And I had also met this girl who wound up being my first wife. She lived with the artist Coop, if you remember, Coop.
Sure.
They weren't dating, but they were roommates, and so that really prompted the immediate move. In January of '91, I think I was 23 years old, and Sammy decided he didn't want to go to California,
right.
So it wound up just being me and Mace, and then we spent the next 2.5 years trying to find an organ player and drummer in California, and that didn't work out either, and so that was pretty much it for the Untamed Youth.
Yeah.
But, at that same time, when I moved out to California, there was this huge rockabilly thing happening, with Big Sandy and the Fly Right Trio, and James Intveld, and Russell Scott, and just, dozens of other bands, and everybody was working and making money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't long before, we formed the Dave and Deke combo and started playing with that.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, we had done all this touring with the Untamed Youth, and I would say the average pay for the entire band was $50 to $100. It was like $50 was not such a good gig, and $100 was a really good gig.
Everybody could eat.
Yeah, or at least put gas in the car, and we'd always crash on people's floors and eat SpaghettiOs out of the can. But it was punk rock touring. And the first gig that I did in California, I played bass for Russell Scott and the Red Hots. And at the end of the night, he hands me like, I don't know, $160 or something. And I'm like, well, do you want me to like hand this out to the rest of the guys? Like, why are you giving me like the whole thing? He's like, no, dude, that's just for you. And I just remember like this weird like, like this heat wave, like literally like went through my whole body. Like, oh my God, I found the end of the rainbow. Ah! Now, of course, the sad thing is like, it's live music in general, but now 20 years later, like, man, I wish I could go back to making $160 a gig. That was good money back then.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, it seemed like that was just like a real like golden time in like LA for like rockabilly and kind of like roots music in general. And I just remember like picking up a lot of records from there and just being like blown away by how cool it was. And, like,
well, the funny thing about it is, I don't know if it was pre-internet or what it was, but there was all these different scenes, like you're talking about. It was like rockabilly and psychobilly and people who were into vintage country and country punk and ska and all these things. Everybody hung out together.
Right.
Like you would have these shows that would be like Big Sandy and Royal Crown Review and a ska band, and everybody would hang, and it was cool, And then I think it was probably the internet that did it. All of a sudden, it became like very regimented. Like, this is the authentic rockabilly shows, and this is the psychobilly shows. And if you show up to these shows and you're not wearing the right haircut or the right clothes, then you're not welcome.
Yeah.
But those early days that I was in Los Angeles, I just remember everybody hanging, and it was cool.
Yeah, pretty neat stuff. Did you? I think I read somewhere you and Robert like met in Memphis.
Yeah,
because you had gone out to see Charlie Feathers or something.
Well, I think it was probably Billy Miller that told me about it. He said, "Man, you should go to Memphis for this show." And I want to say it was, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was, I had graduated high school and I was thinking about moving, So it was probably 89 or something like that, maybe 90. And it was like this dream show. Charlie Feathers and Charlie Rich and Jerry Lee Lewis and the Sun Rhythm section with Sonny Burgess and Tex Rubinowitz and Barbara Pittman and, the list just went on and on. And it's like, I have to go to that. I have to go to that. Yeah. And so I remember driving down there. I had a little like Nissan station wagon that I had painted like the General Lee. And I paid $125 for the car. You know, I think I paid $15 for the paint. You know, and drove it down to Memphis. Slept in it in like.
How did you fit?
With my feet hanging out the back. You know?
Yeah, for sure, man.
And went to this show, and you know, you would think like nowadays you'd have a show like that. There'd be all these rockabilly kids there, you know, wearing their vintage clothes and repro clothes and whatever. And at that show, man, there was 2 people there that were young that looked like they were into rockabilly. It was me and this big Mexican dude. And so, you know, after a couple of hours, like, hey man, what are you doing here? Hey man, what are you doing here? Right. And, you know, he said his name was Robert Williams, and he was from California, and he had driven out there with this buddy of his, and we just kind of struck up this conversation, and he told me about this band he was forming in L.A., and we went out to his car and listened to this cassette tape of his band at the time, which I think was called the Shambles.
Yeah.
And then he told me, like, well, I'm, you know, going to form a new band, you know, turned out to be Big Sandy and the Fly Ride Trio.
Right.
But, yeah, it's just funny, you know, we were like the 2 lone rockabilly kids at this event, you know.
Yeah.
That show was classic Memphis because it was at this place called Bad Bob's Vapors.
Okay.
And it was like on the outskirts of town, and it was like, man, it was really like walking into a scene from Every Which Way But Loose.
Yeah.
It was so redneck, and everybody was wearing, you know, it was a rockabilly show, and everybody was wearing like denim suits and, you know, like leather hats with giant, you know, feathers and conch belts, and it was like, wow, this is like, even though this was 1989 or 90, it was like walking into Memphis 1974, you know what I mean? Like nothing had changed since 1974. And so Robert and I really stuck out like a sore thumb, you know.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Memphis, it was like 94. It was right before my son was born. I had like the same impression. I was just like a punk kid, like walking around and just like, I was like, where's all the like cool like rock and roll people? And they just didn't exist.
Yeah, well, you know, the thing that I've learned about Memphis is that it's a sort of a, is this the right word, a transitory town?
Yeah.
It's like a town where people come up from Mississippi and Alabama, and they live there for a little bit, and then they move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if there's something happening, like a big red-hot glowing ball like Elvis Presley.
Right.
People will come there and make, you know, try to do their own thing, try to make some money, and then they leave.
Right.
You know, and so basically by the 80s or 90s, it was just kind of this ghost town, you know?
Yeah. There was, I think, like some of like the Oblivions people were there.
Yeah. There's always been that tiny little core thing of people who appreciated it.
Yeah.
But the average tourist thinks they can, you know, get off the plane and it's going to be full of rockabilly hepcats.
Like
you know?
in, what was that, Mystery Train?
Yeah.
The Japanese people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, you know, that movie, Mystery Train, is actually like a really accurate documentary of Memphis. It really is.
Totally. Yeah, I don't know. It's another one of those places, like coming down to Nashville, same thing. It's just like, it's only like 4 or 5 hours drive. Like, I don't know why I don't go more often. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. So, when you had started Dave and Deke Combo, and I know you guys, like, toured a lot, and you went to Europe with them, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. When did you start getting into, like the historical research and like doing the liner notes for albums and Bear Family and stuff?
I was kind of always into that because, you know, you were talking about fanzines, and when I was so obsessed with Kicks magazine and a few of these other fanzines that were out at the time, that I think it was 1986 I published my own fanzine, and it was a magazine that was dedicated to all the history of Missouri rock and roll.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just the most exciting thing in the world, you know, especially to be able to reach out and touch it, because it's one thing to like have a record, you know, like, hey, here's this great record, Rock and Roll Blues by Jules Blattner. It's fantastic, you know, it totally rocks. And then it's like, call up Jules Blattner on the phone. Yeah, he's just in St. Louis. drive up to St. Louis. Here's his scrapbook of all of his 50s pictures. Here's like some posters and, memorabilia. And it's like, at that time, everybody was still alive and they weren't even that old, So it was really fun to go out and I wish that we had the technology that we do now, because at that time it was so hard to get scans of photographs and all that. I remember going around with my parents' Sears Roebuck camera, like taking pictures of pictures and then having to develop those, and man, it was so much work back then.
Yeah.
But that, I don't know, man, that sort of historical research stuff just always got me excited.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's partly from my dad, because my dad was always into these planes from the 20s and 30s, and he was always tracking down these people and doing the historical part with on the airplane. So I think I just got that from him.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember like what the first like Bear Family thing I noticed you'd done the liner notes for, but
the first one I did was in '96. It was the Maddox Brothers and Rose box set.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, man, I've done a ton of stuff for him since then.
Yeah. We were walking over here. I was talking to Jeff, and we're just like kind of like talking about your guitar collection, and that I don't know if you told me. I'm so old and my mind's so muddled. I can't remember like conversations.
That's why we're recording it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But the one story was like the TMC guitar, the double neck.
Oh, the TNM custom.
TNM, yeah.
Yeah.
That was. Tell me that story again.
So, Mosrite Guitars is a brand a lot of people know, and they mostly know it from Johnny Ramone and Kurt Cobain playing these Mosrite Ventures models. But Semi Mosley, who was the Mosrite guy, was a hillbilly gospel musician from Oklahoma who got his start in Los Angeles in the mid-'50s. And he was making these crazy handmade guitars with all this, what they call gingerbread on it, like these inlaid armrests and inlaid pick guards and all this ornate decoration. And he made them for Joe Maphis and Larry Collins, and he customized guitars for other people that were on the town hall party. And they were just these really unique kind of guitar as furniture instruments. And I had always been on the hunt for one, and they just didn't exist. They were all custom made for people. And I took out an ad in this little, free paper thing called the Recycler.
Yeah.
Looking for, vintage Mosrite guitars, vintage town hall party photos, I don't know. The ads were free, so it was, very wordy what I was looking for.
Okay.
And I get this call out of the blue from this guy. I said, well, I must know you. I don't know. How would I know you? He said, well, with all the stuff you're writing about, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 27 or however old I was at the time. And he said, what? He couldn't believe that, like, somebody, a young person would be into this stuff. Yeah. This guy's name was Terry MacArthur, and he lived out in the valley, and he had been out in the valley for, 50 years. And when I met him, he was real slow about peeling away the information. Yeah. And at first it was like he's just a fan of this stuff. Then he reveals that, like, he worked for Semi Mosley at Mosrite Guitars, and then he reveals that he made a couple of double necks under his own name in the Mosrite shop in the late 50s. And it was literally like maybe on the third or fourth visit that he's like, well, I have this double neck that I made in 1959 up in the attic.
Yeah, okay.
And then he goes up in the attic and he fishes out this giant case, and he opens it up, and it was kind of like, it was this incredible handmade double neck in really poor condition. All the finish had been sanded off, like everything was broken, missing parts and everything. And I was like, wow, you made this? Because it looked just like the Joe Maphis guitars. And he said, yeah, I made it in 1959. And I said, wow. And he basically just said, well, just take it. Just restore it. Just get it nice. Do a good job. You can take it. And so you remember Johnny Dilks?
Yeah, sure.
Johnny Dilks actually helped restore that guitar. Did a bunch of work on it. R.C. Allen, who was a guitar maker in Los Angeles, did some work on it, and we got it restored. And then all of a sudden, Terry couldn't believe that there was this rockabilly scene who actually liked this stuff, and he was so jazzed about, the restoration of the guitar. He started making the guitars again.
Right.
And what's really funny is that now he lives here in Nashville. I was just at his house yesterday.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and he's got this shop, and he makes these beautiful guitars.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
And now that Sammy Mosley's dead, he's like the last guy on earth that knows how to make these crazy, Joe Maphis-style double necks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's rad. And that kind of led to you, I think, weren't you writing for Vintage Guitar? And
That came a bit later.
a little later?
When I went to college, I'd studied journalism, and I always wanted to do some writing and stuff.
Yeah.
And Guitar Player magazine did a feature on me, and they were kind of asking me who my influences were, and I said, well, if you don't mind, maybe I could write like a little side piece about Grady Martin and Cliff Gallup and all these guys that influenced me. And so I sent that in, and they're like, wow, you actually send in stuff that doesn't need spell corrected.
Or edited. Yeah.
And then I just went right in and was like, why don't you let me write a column? So I did. I wrote a column in Guitar Player for 4 or 5 years, and the funny thing about Guitar Player magazine is I always collected that magazine.
Yep.
And throughout the history of that magazine, it's like somebody cool would come in and write some really cool stuff for a couple of years, and then they would go away.
Yeah.
And then there would be like 3 or 4 years of nothing but Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck, and then somebody else really cool would come in and write some cool stuff, and then they would go away.
Yeah.
And then I became that guy,
Yeah.
So I did this column for I think 4 years, and then all of a sudden, well, we've decided to move in a different direction. I'm like, oh wow, I've seen this play out. I've collected your magazine. And then I wound up doing a bunch of writing for Vintage Guitar Magazine, Fretboard Journal, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was in Guitar Player, but there was like an article by Poison Ivy, and I was like, wow.
I remember that, yeah.
Because she's like such a recluse,
yeah.
And it was like amazingly like more technical than I ever would have thought based on her playing.
Right.
And it was great, and then that was just it. It was just like, done.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, why would you not have her write more stuff?
Sadly, at the end of the day, the reason why they put Jimmy Page and Eddie Van Halen on the cover so many times is because those guys sell magazines,
Yep.
Cliff Gallup and Grady Martin and Poison Ivy, don't sell the, the magazines they need to sell.
No, that's a bummer. When about did your first book come out?
Well, the book came much later as well. I don't know if you saw this book. It was just called Rockabilly. It was a big coffee table book. Mm-hmm. Trying to remember what year that came out, but I got contacted by this publishing company up in Minnesota, Voyager Press, and they wanted me to write a few articles for this Rockabilly book. And I thought it was going to be a disaster, because anytime they try to do a comprehensive history of Rockabilly, it's always terrible.
Right.
And I did an article on, Scotty Moore and the Echosonic amp, and I think maybe Glenn Glenn and a couple other things, and wasn't very much writing. And they sent me this check, and it was like a few $1,000s. I was like, what? When you're writing for those guitar magazines, the paycheck's really small.
If you get one.
When you're writing for, record company like Bear Family or something, it's really small, Yeah. So this was like the first real paycheck I'd ever gotten for writing.
Right.
And so immediately I was like, what do you need? You want me to write a book? Tell me what you need and I'll write it,
Yeah.
And the guy came back and said, well, actually, we have this series of books. Most of them have been about cars where people find stuff out in the wild. Like they had this one called The Cobra in the Barn, and, like they had a motorcycle one and a tractor one.
Sure.
I think they had 4 or 5 volumes of cars, And so they said, we have this concept for a book called The Strat in the Attic. Mm-hmm. That's all we have as a title.
Yeah.
And so we want somebody to write a book about finding guitars out in the wild. And so I said, man, I'm your guy. I got stories. And so I wrote this book and used a bunch of my stories and a bunch of my friends' stories that I'd heard over the years.
Yeah.
And it got published, and it did really well,
Yeah.
And so we wound up doing a second one, and then the publishing company, I think, is maybe just barely hanging on. But when I first met with them, before I wrote the first book, they had the entire top floor of this, office building in downtown Minneapolis, about 150 employees. It was bustling. And by the time I finished the second book, it was like down to like 10 employees, and I was dealing directly with the CEO. It was like,
Yeah.
that's just the way print publishing is gone.
Yeah. It's pretty sad, man. It's. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, there's like the part of me that's like nostalgic and longs for those heady days when like things, like actual things, had value.
Right.
And then now it's like, oh yeah, but I get all this like incredible access to like incredible stuff for free. Like I have this Spotify playlist I listen to a lot, just called like Early Possum and Paycheck. So it's all the like Donnie Young, early Johnny Paycheck, right. And then all the like Mercury Star Day, George Jones, and then some like pedal steel stuff and whatnot. And it's probably like 20 albums of material. Man, that would take me years to collect, just to find those like recordings.
Yeah. And not only that, even if you found them cheap, it'd be a few $100,
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. I totally get why the young kids are not into owning things. I get that. It's just interesting because as a culture, especially since the Great Depression, America has been about hoarding things. And so, I can see this giant movement happening when all the baby boomers die off. That we're gonna lose a lot of history because their kids don't want that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, my mom just passed away in January, and my mom kind of had all the typical like silverware set and like a China buffet and all that, and we're doing this estate sale. Nobody wants that stuff anymore. I mean, couldn't give it away.
I know.
And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens, with all this stuff that we love that you really want to be preserved, whether it's musical instruments or memorabilia or records or whatever. Like, to me, I'm firmly in the hoarder camp.
Me too. Yeah.
So my thing is let's preserve what we can.
Yeah.
Try to keep these things out of the dumpsters.
Yeah.
But just at the same time, like, dude, I get it. I mean, the bulk of my music listening is in the car on my iPod. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As much as I love vinyl records, it's like the only time I really have to listen to music is driving around in the car.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, my dad, he's just like your kind of typical like Midwestern meat and potatoes, regular like, entrepreneurial kind of blue collar guy. And he just has no romance at all for like my grandparents' generation. And even he's just like thrown out stuff, and I'd be like, you threw out like my grandpa used to have this awesome like old like 40s sign. I think he stole it from the factory, but it said like do not stare at arc, because he was like women. Yeah. And I was like, you threw that out? That sign was so cool. He's like, why would you want that piece of shit for? And I'm like, because it was cool. He's like, it's gone. Too bad. But yeah, I think like our generation is kind of like stuck between that like I don't know, that like baby boomer generation that's just like they don't care about the past, and then like our kids, they're just like, well, the past is really cute, but I don't really want to have to invest in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little scary sometimes, I think. Where did you get, I know you've got the Ducati motorcycle, and do you still have your old Cadillac?
It's Moto Guzzi.
I'm sorry, Moto Guzzi.
Yeah. I got that over in Belgium, actually.
You brought it from Belgium?
Well, it's a funny story, I had this Honda CB750, which was a good bike.
Great bikes.
Man, I sort of regret getting rid of that thing because I could not kill it. I kept trying to kill it, for years. It was like, it just kept running, Store it outside, don't start it for 4 months, no problems.
Yeah.
But I wanted something cool, And we were over in Europe on tour, and the guy who was doing these tours was based out of this little town called Turnhout, Belgium, and he would hire this crusty old guy to drive the van. And this guy ran a motorcycle repair shop.
Oh, cool.
And man, he had this beautiful Moto Guzzi in his showroom. And I forget what he had it priced at. You know, it was like $7,000 or something like that. I was like, man, that sure is pretty. I wish I could afford it. And he's like, I really want to get rid of this thing. You know, give me $3,500 for it. I was like, oh man, jeez. Well, there's no way I could get it to L.A. He's like, no. I'll put it in a crate. It'll be there in about 4 months. It'll take $200. No, there's no way you can ship a motorcycle from Belgium to LA for $200. You're like, yeah, let's do it. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can't say no to that. And sure enough, you know, like 4 months go by, I get this phone call, like, there's a crate for you, you know, down in Compton or something, you know, one of these like shipping places.
Right.
And I've had the bike ever since, and
Yeah.
it's fun bike, but I don't know if you ever owned a Moto Guzzi, man. It's like everything about it is so Italian. You know, like why did they do it this way? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then you realize, like, oh yeah, there's a whole cult around how to keep these carburetors going after all the threads strip out and after all this happens, and like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked at an amusement park, and we had a roller coaster, and it was like made in Italy. I don't know why it was in Monticello, Indiana, but it was made in Italy, so all the instructions were in Italian.
Wow.
And they had like little tape, those little tape labels, and you know what it actually said. But just like the little control panel was beautiful. I mean, that itself was just like a work of art. Like the buttons were like these awesome Art Deco buttons, and it was all engraved and like polished brass. And yeah, Italians definitely have like a very romantic way of, you know, doing stuff. It's pretty cool.
Well, you know, years later, when I was on tour over there, we were playing in Milan, and we had the next day off. And somebody in Milan was like, hey, you own a Guzzi, right? Like, yeah. It's like, well, you know, tomorrow's Moto Guzzi Day at the Moto Guzzi factory in Lake Como. I'm like, what? It was like 30 miles away, you know? So I told the promoter, like, we got to go to this. We have to go to this. And when I actually got to tour the Moto Guzzi factory, suddenly it all made sense.
Yeah.
Because it was this ancient factory, like, I don't know, from the 20s or something, this old brick building.
Yep.
And there they were making like these Cybertron bikes, you know, these modern, you know, I forget what year this was. It was like 2006 or 7.
Yeah.
In this crazy old 1920s factory, and you could just see like the collusion of super old and super new ideas, and that's exactly what my Moto Guzzi is, you know.
Yeah.
It's like some stuff on it is like, wow, okay, that's really advanced for my bike's a 1973. Some stuff's really advanced for 1973, and then this other part looks like Geppetto made it in his puppet shop, you know, like with some leather and some handmade nails, you know. Like,
yeah, they're beautiful bikes, man. And you still have your old Cadillac?
I do, yeah.
And that's what, a 59?
It's a 60.
60. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's got the kind of like square taillights, like kind of roundish square taillights.
Well, it's sort of like it's sort of a neutered version of the 59
right.
fin, and the taillights are sort of like a sliver, almost like a crescent moon that go just up in the, you know, in the vertical part of the taillight.
Okay. Yeah.
They're not like the big, you know, round taillights that come out of the fin like the 59s.
Yeah. And that's is that a Coupe de Ville or?
No, it's an Eldorado convertible.
It is an Eldorado.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Maybe not.
Maybe like a couple pictures, but I don't think I've ever seen it like out.
Well, I had a 57 Coupe de Ville for 12 years or something like that.
Yeah. That's rad, man. What do you got going on coming up? I know you've been like doing like some festival stuff and
just keeping busy,
hitting Japan, and
it's so funny because I you know, my career is not like a real career. You know, it's not like I have a manager and, you know, press guys and a record label working me or anything like that. And I'm sort of astounded that it keeps going, you know. But keep getting phone calls, so it's like I kind of thought I was going to have a few months off. Then all of a sudden, it's like, nope, I'm going to Italy at the beginning of July, and I'm going to Indianapolis June 23rd.
Oh, you're going to be there
at
this year?
the Road Rockets Rumble, yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. I talked to Bloodshot Bill because he's like been through Indy a couple times and we like always like miss signals. So I know he loves spaghetti. So I love like the awesome like Italian place I'm going to take him to. So
all right,
you should go too.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be great, dude.
I'm looking forward to that. I haven't played Indy since. I'm trying to think if I played there since the last Weekender, which was a million years ago.
Yeah. I think that was probably when Lenny and Dave were still doing it.
It was at Radio.
Yeah. God, when was that?
Well, what's funny is that there's a video that always shows up on YouTube that was shot there, and I'm playing this black Les Paul. So it must have been around 2005.
Oh, yeah. You got that.
Because I had that, I literally only toured with that in 2005, so.
Yeah, I remember you getting that guitar, and it wasn't it like a reissue, like one of the early reissues, but it had just like all old parts in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool guitar, man.
Well, a few nights after the indie show, this is the only time this has ever happened to me, and I still recoil in horror when I tell the story. It was a 1972 or 3 reissue of a 55 Les Paul Custom. It was still a valuable guitar.
Sure.
You know, even those 70s ones go for good money. We had found this mini bike on tour.
Okay.
And within a few days of getting the mini bike, I had worked this thing into the act where I would ride it on the dance floor while eefing and singing Mule Skinner Blues. And I would have the guitar around my neck, you know. And the guitar was very secure, like the straps were secure. It wasn't like rickety or anything, but we were playing in Cleveland at the Beachland Ballroom. I think it was just a few days after we had played at Indy. And I did the thing, no problem, you know. Riding around on it. I wasn't really riding around on a mini bike, but you know the engine was going, and it was just going in this little circle, like you know, and eefing and all that. And when I did the dismount, something happened, and the guitar went like this, and when it landed, like it just snapped the neck in half.
No.
It was brutal, you know. And those Gibsons, especially from that era, are like infamous for doing that. You know, it's just like you hit it at the wrong angle. That's it, man. Yeah. And Crazy Joe from Ohio, actually, I took it to all these places in California, and they're like, nope, can't repair this, you know, send it to Gibson, they'll put a modern neck on it or whatever. And I was really depressed about it, and Crazy Joe actually found a guy near him who built a replica neck and used the old fretboard and the old headstock cap, and when I got it back, it was better than it was before.
Wow.
It was actually a better guitar than it was before the accident. So it has a happy ending, but
yeah.
I just remember that was 2005.
Wow. Yeah. Well, man, let's see what time I got.
Yeah, we've been
jamming for about 45 minutes. Yeah, man, you guys got to get going to your lunch thing?
We have a lunch thing at 2.
At 2.
I'm actually meeting Lloyd Green, the steel guitar player.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
For lunch?
Yeah, well, you know that Julia Thompson girl? You know,
yeah.
She's like pals with him. And,
yeah.
So I was basically just did the fanboy thing of, there's any way you can meet Lloyd Green. I tried to get him to play my show. He wouldn't do it, you know. Since his wife died, now he's coming back out and playing more, and he's doing a ton of sessions. He's, you know, playing with Julia and people like that, but he doesn't like doing live stuff.
Yeah. I interviewed another dude from Denver, Dave Barker. He's like a pedal steel dude. He's like a metal dude that became a pedal steel guy. And he's like a Lloyd Green nut. And he plays with that guy, Casey James Prestwood. Mm-hmm. And like Casey James Prestwood is kind of like you. Like he's just like, you know, has no like fear of like calling people up and like, hey, I'm Casey. Are you Lloyd Green? Can I, you know, will you come to my show in Nashville? Right. Not even just like having any kind of like mental, you know, like, why would Lloyd Green want to come to your show? But he does, and he comes like every time they play, he comes out. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and he so they're going to be down here in a couple weeks. So hopefully I can meet Lloyd Green then. But
Well, I brought all my Lloyd Green and Johnny Paycheck albums from home. And, I to get him to sign it, And then I realized, like, oh man, before I go over there, I have to scrape off. Like, every single one of them has a label that's kind of insulting, like $3, $2, $3.99. So I'm like, I got to get all those off before I take them over, so they won't be insulted.
yeah, for sure. He seems like a pretty affable guy. Like, everybody that I've known that's talked to him says he's like a real sweetheart. And
There was a fantastic article that Robbie Folks wrote about Lloyd Green. It was published in one of the, what was that journal that the Country Music Hall of Fame used to put out?
Oh, yeah.
The article's online. If you Google, Lloyd Green, Robbie Folks, but you should read it because, number one, Robbie Folks is a fantastic writer.
He is.
Yeah. Really great writer, and his whole in-depth examination of Lloyd Green is really, really amazing.
Yeah, I love that stuff, man. I was talking to the dudes from Countryside of Harmonica Sam last night. We talked about Lloyd Green a little bit and Johnny Paycheck, and I love that stuff, man. It's so good. Just like consistently, like every song's great.
Yeah.
And the best, man.
Well, and it's, we could keep yapping for hours. But I love doing the newspaper research, and just like typing in keywords and seeing what comes up, and it's like, I love those Paycheck records as much as you, and I'm looking, and it's like, you find ads for, Paycheck playing in Albany, New York on a Tuesday night or whatever, but then he got arrested like all these times for like, stealing antiques out of a guy's house and, just like little pissant things like that. And you realize like, wow, he was making those great records and he wasn't making any money at all,
No. Well, there's one picture of Johnny Paycheck, and I know I talked to you about Mockingbird Hill in my hometown, Anderson, and there's that like famous picture of like Don Rich and Buck Owens on stage. It's before they got the sparkly guitars. They're still playing the old tellies. But there's that one picture we talked about of Johnny Paycheck playing steel. And I've just always been like, how the hell did he end up? I mean, because like Anderson and like Hamilton, Ohio, wherever he's from, are maybe about an hour drive apart. But I just like always have been fascinated by it. So I was talking to my mom about it, because she would have been a little girl then. And I asked her. She's like, I wasn't at that show, but I did see Buck Owens when I was a little girl. And she said, the lady whose parents own that place is still alive. And she's like, she told me one time they had a stage in their basement, and they had like a place for the bands to stay. So the bands would stay, they'd play at the park, and they would come back and they would have a private party with like the stage.
Wow. And
she said she's got like pictures of it.
Wow, you got to track that down.
Man. I know. So,
well, the picture of Paycheck playing steel is just so weird because
it's totally
there's
weird.
no recordings of him playing steel. It's like, wonder if he was any good or not.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been like a pickup band, or maybe that was just like one of the like local music parks that were so active at that time, and that was just where he played, or maybe like Buck Owens was friends with him and just liked him or something. Like, it's just totally hard to tell.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a great story there. So, cool, man. Well, that'll about do it, I guess.
All right. Well, good to see you again, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad we could do this.
Yeah.
Sorry we couldn't get my pop in on the interview. He would have been good for some
We'll do another one.
background.
Man.
All right.
We'll do another one. Yeah. Cool.
Well,
Thanks
he,
for
he
talking.
loves coming down to the Nashville Boogie.
Does he?
Yeah.
He said he has to go to bed by 9.
Yeah. He was missing a lot of the bands. He stayed up for my show last night, and as soon as it was over, like, going to bed.
Hey, you're right. It was 2005 because we got lost in my Jeep that time.
There you go.
And you and Sugar Balls were like this in the back of the Jeep on top of gear. That was frustrating.
Man, I do remember that now.
Sugar Balls.
Yeah.
Oh, man. We have some... You made that video of him eating all those White Castles in my dining room.
That's right.
So, it used to be kind of this like little tradition when like guys would come through and I'd like either book the show or like call up the man, hey, if you want to stay at my house, you're welcome. And I had a pretty nice house at the time. And so they came through, and Chris was like, let's go to White Castle. So we get like this whole sack of like 10 White Castles, and he just like sat at my dining room table and put mayonnaise on them.
Yeah.
And he's just like,
That was sick.
shoving them in his face. So
Which is funny because the Kumar, what is it?
Harold and Kumar.
Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle was just on yesterday when I was getting dressed, so.
Yeah.
yeah, that's funny, man.
You know, I have to say,
Oh, I think they're gross.
I give a slight edge to Crystal.
Yeah, I've had Crystal since I was a little kid.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing, but I have to say, you know, they have like hot sauce at the Crystal. Something about it, man.
Ugh, just smelling it makes me sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't really eat it when she's around.
Well, now they have veggie sliders, and they have
It's a different world.
It's so strange, and I don't know if it's like a joke or if it's serious or whatever the hell, but every White Castle in Indiana, they always have a thing. It's like, make your Valentine's reservation
Oh,
now.
I heard about that.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
I took a picture of that in New York or something. I posted it like, ha ha, who would ever believe this? And then people hipped me to the fact that it's a real thing. It's a big deal. They put out like, you know, tablecloths and candles and all this stuff. And you have to have reservations, and it's packed.
If you love me, you would take me there for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, okay, sweetie.
Okay.
I think there is a White Castle in Vegas now.
Oh my god.
I know White Castle's in L.A. But
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
you got it.
All right, that was my conversation with Deke. So in the room there, you'll hear at the end, Deke's girlfriend Sally Joe was with us, as well as my buddy Jeff Maurer from a band called Dixons, and we all had a little free-form conversation there at the end. You can keep up with Deke on the normal social media. He is on both Instagram and Facebook. You can also check out his website, and I'll include links to all of that in the show notes and on the blog. Man, there's, you know, one of the things I just really enjoy about Deke as my friend, but also like getting to sit down and talk to him, is he's just done so much. And as I was sitting and listening to the conversation, I'm like, why don't we talk about him, curating the Bakersfield exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame? Why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about all the Americana music legends that he's played with and recorded and interviewed, and so on and so forth? He's really lived a pretty cool life, and he's still a pretty young guy. So if you don't know who Deke Dickerson is and you're listening to this, definitely totally worth checking out. They call him Mr. Entertainment for a reason, and that just barely scratches the surface. All right, so as you know, I didn't put on a show last week, and instead chose to take that time and head down to Nashville Boogie. Mainly I went to see Countryside of Harmonica Sam, which is a really great traditional country band from Sweden. And I wouldn't usually do it, but I'll go ahead and include that on a blog entry with some links to their music, because I'm a super big fan. What else is going on? I sent some parts of my bike, of my shovel head, off to the polisher up in northern Indiana. So hopefully next week I'll be getting those back, and I can finally finish putting my bike together. It's been at like 98% for like a year or whatever. So once I get the parts back from the polisher, it should go together, wire it, plumb it, and should be good to go. And then also Saturday, I guess I'll just kind of keep it a surprise, but I'm getting back something that's pretty cool and that I used to have, and I'll be using that for the show, and hopefully that'll kind of be a little bit of a calling card. So I'll post pictures of that on my Instagram when I get it. If you don't already follow the Rulers and Riders Instagram, it is rulers_and riders and Rulers and Riders. So what else? Definitely check out the show blog. I'll have some pictures and curated content from as many of Deke's musical projects that I can. Also links to his books and some other pertinent stuff that we talked about. And that's really about it. Please become a Patreon supporter. I love doing the show. It's really a labor of love, but it would be nice to make a little bit of money off of it occasionally, because I do have to pay for stuff like recording software, bandwidth, hosting, so on and so forth. If you don't want to become a Patreon supporter, and you could do that for as little as $5 a month, $5 a month. I totally understand. Another way you can support the show is you can buy a shirt, and the links to the Big Cartel show or store will be in the show notes. The other way that you can really help me out is to repost my links from Facebook, from Instagram, repost the blog. If there's any of your friends who are interested in independent lifestyle journalism, the creative arts, music, history, anything of that nature, I think Rulers and Riders would be the podcast for them, and they would enjoy it. So please spread the word. Every little bit helps. That's going to about do it for this episode of Rulers and Riders. I'm actually finishing up this episode during the daylight, which I think is a first in over 4 months of producing the show. So I'll be getting it finished here pretty soon. As always, we appreciate your help and your feedback. And until the next time, we'll see you down the road.